Hello, this is Deborah Disney, and this presentation on legal issues related to academic accommodations for students with disabilities was prepared for EDD 710 at Allen College. In this presentation, I'll start with an overview of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, what it means for students with disabilities, SWD, and what leaders in institutions of higher education need to know. I'll talk about the opinions of some folks who are opposed to the ADA and give some examples from case law that will explain what can happen when colleges and universities do not abide by the law of the ADA. Then I'll move into some recommendations regarding how a college or university might lessen the potential for being sued, and actually how to enhance learner success and what the academic leader's role might be in accomplishing that goal. And I'll close with a summary and a suggested assignment. I'd like to start with a set of pre-presentation questions which I'll ask again at the end as post-presentation questions. So at this point, what do you think? Do all people learn the same? And is it possible that the ways that people learn are as diverse and unique as their fingerprints? So can a one-size-fits-all approach to education fill every student's needs? The Americans with Disabilities Act, which became law in 1990 and was amended in 2008, is a civil rights law which prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities to make sure they have the same rights and opportunities as everyone else. It's divided into 5 titles or sections related to different areas of public life. Title II covers public education and Title III covers private education. You often hear the phrase Section 504 used interchangeably with the phrase ADA. There are some differences and similarities between the two. In a later slide I'll expand on that, but both define disability as a physical or mental impairment that significantly restricts one or more of an individual's major life activities. And a student with a disability is a student who has a record of these impairments, or a student who is considered to have such an impairment. As we saw in the previous slide, a disability, as defined by the ADA, is a physical or mental impairment that significantly restricts one or more of an individual's major life activities. So that raises the question, what's considered a major life activity? The website where I found that answer is listed at the bottom of this slide, so I'll not read the slide to you because you can see that the list is pretty extensive. So probably the most common disabilities that you as an educator have encountered with your students would be the things that might interfere with learning, reading, concentrating, and thinking, perhaps extreme anxiety disorders or ADHD. And the ADA also now includes HIV, contagious and non-contagious diseases as disabilities. And so what does this mean for institutions of higher education? Well, we are required by law to offer examinations and or courses in a place and manner accessible to persons with disabilities, or offer alternative accessible arrangements for such individuals. And this is commonly referred to as special accommodations. So here are some examples of special accommodations. You might be most familiar with a student with anxiety or ADHD getting modified exam administration. This might include taking tests in a distraction-reduced environment, or getting extended time for a test, or maybe even taking a test on paper rather than on a computer. As you can see on this slide, modified exam administration is just one of many possible adjustments. There's a wonderful professional organization that helps disability officers at colleges and universities to keep the institution compliant. It's called the Association on Higher Education and Disability, otherwise known as AHED. They listed special accommodations being either academic or non-academic. And again, I'll not read the slide to you, but if you have interest, you might pause the presentation and go to the head website that's listed at the bottom of this slide. And sometimes students and instructors will ask about special accommodations when a student has a broken leg and is on crutches. Depending on the institution, it still might be the Disability Services Office that has chosen to help coordinate those short-term accommodations. However, a transitory impairment lasting less than 6 months is not defined as a disability under ADA, and pregnancy-related issues are actually covered under Title IX, a different law. Depending on how large your institution is, the Title IX coordinator and the ADA coordinator may or may not be the same person and office. As I said earlier, you often hear the phrases Section 504 and Americans with Disabilities Act used interchangeably. There are some similarities and differences between the two. Section 504 applies to institutions of higher education that receive federal financial assistance. ADA extended Section 504 so that people are protected from discrimination in educational institutions even if the college is not receiving federal financial assistance funds. Plus, under ADA, people are protected from discrimination in public or private employment, transportation, and many other places of public access. The information in the next few slides came from a website for Kaskaskia College in which they listed information they had adapted from a handbook entitled Promoting Post-Secondary Education for Students with Learning Disabilities. So what is the purpose of the law? Both 504 and ADA, the purpose is to ensure that individuals with disabilities have the opportunity, as much as is feasibly possible, to be fully integrated into mainstream American life. And who's covered? Well, both Section 504 and ADA cover people with disabilities. Additionally, the ADA covers people who are related to or associated with a person with a disability. And this point is extremely important. With both Section 504 and ADA, the individual with the disability must self-identify and provide appropriate documentation. So you can't ask somebody if they have a disability. They need to self-identify. And then the individual must pay the costs of the evaluation that provides the documentation that proves that they have the disability. Though the college is mandated to offer the ADA services to students, no federal funding is available to the college to implement these services. In other words, the cost of the salary of the ADA coordinator is absorbed by the college, not funded by a grant from the government. However, the college does not have to help the student pay for the cost of seeing a psychologist to get an evaluation that proves they have ADHD or an anxiety disorder, as an example. The burden of proof lies with the student. And if a student with disabilities believes that their right for special accommodations have been violated, they can complain to the Office of Civil Rights, which is a sub-agency of the U.S. Department of Education, or they can complain to the U.S. Department of Justice. Since the ADA also covers employees, an employee with disability who believes that their rights have been violated probably would complain to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. If the college receives federal financial assistance, the student can sue the college. The college may also have to cover the student's attorney fees and litigation expenses, and additional damage awards can be assessed up to $50,000. Have you encountered faculty, staff, and students who are opposed to special accommodations? Why do you suppose people might be opposed? I've encountered some faculty members and staff and students who do not have disabilities who believe that the ADA gives students with disabilities an unfair advantage. Some think the student with disabilities is just lying to get extra time, and some faculty members might simply not like the extra hassle because it does take some extra time and effort to coordinate the adjustments with the testing center. I've even encountered some students with disabilities who are opposed to special accommodations. Some of them don't really understand their rights. Some of them worry that their credibility will be damaged if their faculty member perceives the situation negatively. And some worry about how they will be viewed by other students if they're seen going into the testing center. And what if then in the future they work with those fellow students? Will this stigma and the false perception follow them into the workplace? Most students I know who get special accommodations are not trying to just get away with anything that they can get. They're just trying to have an equal playing field with equal opportunities for academic success. My question to a student with disabilities who is hesitant to get special accommodations is this: if a person with bad vision tried to see the board without their glasses, what would you tell them? They have the right to put on their glasses, so perhaps it's worthwhile to at least go to the disability office and explore what your rights are. So now we move into some examples of cases. Even if a faculty member is opposed to special accommodations, they can't just decide to not abide by them. Here's a case in which a student with disabilities filed a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights against the State University of New York in Albany, alleging discrimination because a professor refused to alter academic requirements. The student had registered with the university's Office of Disabled Students, and that office had issued her a letter stating that she would receive certain academic adjustments, including flexibility with assignment due dates for papers. She showed the letter to her professors to request the adjustments, and one professor refused to provide her with the additional time to submit her assignments. The student went back to the disability office and was told that the professor could refuse if the academic adjustment being requested would fundamentally alter the essential requirements of the course. But that was actually only a partially true statement. The institution indeed can decide that providing the accommodation would result in a fundamental alteration to the curriculum. However, that type of decision must be made by the president or chancellor or an appropriate designee, and it must be put in writing. In fact, the Office for Civil Rights has a policy that states that the best practice is for a group of people, not just one person, but a group of trained, knowledgeable, and experienced people, conduct a careful, thoughtful, and rational review of the academic program and its requirements, and only then make decisions regarding whether the essential requirement in question can be modified for a specific disabled student, and if so, they should come up with alternatives for the essential requirements. Because this university professor made the decision alone and refused the student's accommodations, the Office of Civil Rights determined that Albany had in fact discriminated against that student. And let's look at just one more case. Colleges and universities must also have a prompt and equitable grievance process available to respond to disputes when students complain about the process of requesting accommodations, or when students complain that the institution failed to provide accommodations. In this case, the Office for Civil Rights found that California State University in Los Angeles denied a student's agreed upon accommodations, and that the grievance procedure posted on the university's website was ambiguous and contradictory, and the university agreed to resolve the issues. So let's move to some recommendations. The academic leader must help the institution to follow the ADA law and to avoid legal issues that arise when the law is broken. Some people might say that colleges and universities will be legally covered as long as they make sure that people with disabilities are treated equally and have equal access to academic success. But perhaps equal access is not enough. Does everyone benefit from the same supports? As you can see in this photograph, all three students are being treated equally. They have equal accommodations, equal-sized boxes. However, the tallest student would have been able to see over the fence without the support, and the shortest student is not being supported enough and still cannot see over the fence. Only the middle student is benefiting from this support. Equal support does not eliminate barriers, so a one-size-fits-all approach to special accommodations will not likely be adequate. So then what is the best recommendation to make sure the institution is following the law of Section 504 and the ADA? What if the individuals are given supports unique to their needs so that each has equal access? In this photo, the shortest student got 2 boxes. All 3 students can see the game and they're being treated equitably. This is probably how most institutions have been providing special accommodations, but perhaps there's a better way. What if the systemic barrier of the fence was removed? What if the reason for the inequity was addressed? In this photo, all 3 students can see the game without the need for accommodations. In the short run, it could be time-consuming to replace the fence. However, in the long run, never again will anyone have to scramble to find the right size box for the students to stand on. So, how does this apply to the academic world? What exactly am I proposing as a recommendation for institutions of higher education regarding abiding by the civil rights laws we've been discussing? I'm suggesting that we start the process of removing systemic barriers. Let's revisit these 3 questions that I had asked at the beginning of the presentation. What if we started operating with the assumption that no 2 people learn the same, and in fact each individual learns in a way that it's unique to them? Would we start to be open to the idea that a one-size-fits-all educational process might not be filling every student's needs? How might we be able to start to minimize barriers and maximize learning for all students? I encourage you to watch the 4-minute TED Talk that introduces how Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, does exactly that. As we just saw in the TED Talk, as an educator, you're invited to ask yourself these questions. What is your goal? What do you want students to learn and know and care about? There might be educators who wake up thinking, how can I make my students fail today? But those are not the educators I know. Most educators I know want their students to succeed and to learn the information that they are offering. So it could be pretty exciting to start looking at our courses through a different lens and to ask ourselves, what barriers exist in my courses as they now exist? Is there an aspect of how I teach that could be tweaked to help most students to succeed? How can I minimize the barriers and maximize learning for all students? Well, this is a process. It will not be accomplished overnight. But is there one thing that you could do immediately, such as committing to use captioning on any videos that you record? Screencast-O-Matic, which costs less than $20 per year, has a captioning option. Then over time, perhaps you can start to use the UDL framework to minimize barriers and maximize learning in your courses, just a little at a time. According to Rosenmeyer, there are 3 basic components to the UDL framework. The first one is to be intentional in using a variety of methods to present content. This could mean offering traditional PowerPoint presentations or Prezis. It could also mean offering videos or allowing students to record your presentations so they can listen again later, or making sure that presentations have closed captioning or open captioning. I won't go into the difference between those right now. I actually read that this past week, but or offering handouts. Are you familiar with the VARC, which you can find at varc-learn.com? You could encourage your students to go to that website and take a questionnaire that will help them to know if they tend to be visual, auditory, read-write, or kinesthetic hands-on learners. And then you as the educator can be intentional about offering a variety of methods to present content, and the learner can be intentional about using their strongest method of learning. The second component of the UDL framework is to allow the student to use various means of expression to prove to you that they know the content. Some students will always find a traditional test to be a challenge. They might know the information, but maybe the test is designed in a way that's simply assessing whether or not they can take a test. Are there other ways they can prove their knowledge to you? Can you give them some choices, like to create a poster, or to give an oral presentation, or to write a paper, or to have an artistic expression of some sort? And then the third component of the UDL framework is to use multiple modes of engagement in the classroom. This might be using small group discussions or frequent and quick ways to assess where students are in their understanding, such as having them answer the question, what is the muddiest point? It's a prompt for a 1-minute reflection at the end of class. And I refer you to Gradle and Edson for more engagement ideas. So embedding these features into your courses can help students with disabilities, but it can also benefit even the students who have not identified disabilities. How many times have you seen able-bodied people using wheelchair ramps, perhaps because they're carrying a heavy load or because they had on roller skates? How many times have you seen an able-bodied person push the automatic door opener, which was designed for wheelchair access, but they used it because they had their hands full? So I keep captioning on my TV at home because most of the shows I watch were recorded in England and Australia. And I'm not deaf, but when accents are heavy, I rely on the visual words to understand what's going on. And I actually prefer visual learning over auditory learning. So I appreciate captioning in a variety of situations, like when I'm watching TVs at loud airports or when I'm watching videos on my phone in quiet libraries. So captioning is the low-hanging fruit, that first step toward UDL that could make education more inclusive and actually benefit everybody. There's sufficient research on UDL to now call it an evidence-based practice. Though it's beyond the scope of this project to list that research, here are some websites to get you started if you're interested in learning more. Probably the academic leader and faculty members would want to know more about whether students and faculty are more engaged as the result of using the UDL framework, and certainly academic leaders and administration would want to know whether the use of the UDL framework has resulted in an increase in grades, an increase in retention, and then though the answers to those questions could be used as a recruitment tool to entice more people to come to that institution. At the very least, the academic leader must ensure that the institution remains compliant with the ADA and Section 504 guidelines in order to avoid legal issues. The academic leader must also guarantee sufficient budget for the needs of the Disability Services Office, including professional development and membership in professional organizations, so staff can stay abreast of latest changes in laws. The leader must also sustain policies and procedures that protect students with disabilities against discrimination, guaranteeing that they will have the same rights and opportunities as everyone else. And I'm proposing that the academic leader can move toward communicating a grand vision, leading faculty toward being willing to start to implement the UDL framework to reduce barriers and maximize learning, not only for students with disabilities, but for the benefit of all students. Any seasoned educator could probably reflect on their own changing perceptions over time regarding how they've responded to the needs of students with disabilities. As an educator yourself, where are you on this continuum? Do you believe students with disabilities should have no accommodations, equal accommodations like in the first photo, equitable accommodations personalized to fit their disability like in the second photo, or are you open to considering the framework of UDL, minimizing barriers and maximizing learning for all students? How can an academic leader help convince faculty members to move toward using the UDL framework? Well, I turned to, how to pronounce this, I'm not sure, Argyris, to start to answer that question. Argyris talked about leaders who lead learn. They're innovative and meet the needs of a changing environment. So here are my suggestions based on the experiences of Argyris. First, leading learning requires data from real-life experience. So my suggestion is that If a few faculty members could be recruited, they could start piloting the use of the UDL framework, maybe keep records of their experiences and reflect on their experiences, and after 1 or 2 semesters, these pioneers could share their findings with other faculty members. Number 2, leading learning can happen when a case study is shared. So perhaps one of those pioneers could provide a case study and engage in storytelling regarding the outcomes for a student with disabilities as well as a student without disabilities after the use of the UDL framework. And finally, leading learning also cautions the leader to be aware that people are wired to defend their own opinions. So we would need to show respect for their opinions, but also the leader can indicate that he or she trusts that all have the capacity to be willing to look for potential gaps and inconsistencies in the opinions that they've been holding regarding how to treat students with disabilities. So in summary, I provided an overview of the ADA, what it means for students with disabilities, and what leaders and institutions of higher education need to know regarding the legal implications. We talked about the legal repercussions if the issue is not taken seriously, and I offered some ideas regarding how an academic leader might help move an institution toward one possible solution, which is the universal design for learning. So now I'd like to leave you with a suggestion for your discussion post. One component of the UDL framework is to offer multiple ways the learner can prove they understand the content. If this truly were an assignment, what method of expression would you use to demonstrate your understanding of the legal issues and the leader's roles regarding accommodations for students with disabilities? What method of expression would you use to reflect on how your opinions have or have not changed as a result of this presentation? If we were actually in a face-to-face class, would you choose a traditional exam or would you choose something else? If I had more time, I would have been true to the UDL framework and would have captioned this video, and I would have created a handout, but I will upload the PowerPoint and the recording. I hope you've enjoyed seeing this presentation as much as I've enjoyed creating it. I do apologize for the length, but there was so much to say. So thank you, and I really look forward to hearing your reflections.